All right, well, I'm going to get us started here. It's about 2 past noon. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our commercial tenant panel today. We have a great set of panelists here who are going to walk you through the ins and outs of this issue. I want to give some brief introductions here to our panel. First is Michelle Reeves of Civilis Consultants. If you could raise your hand, I'll go on you so everyone can see you. Also, Sarah Daly of Commercial Realty Advisors Northwest. We also have Renee and John Gorham on the call, who are co-owners of Toro Bravo Inc. And then we're also expecting Aaron Holloway of Perkins Qua today. So I'm going to start off the agenda with you, Michelle. I'm wondering if you can give our attendees here a brief overview of the commercial eviction moratorium and what that really means for commercial tenants.
I can't. I just wanted to give a shout out. I think Aaron Holloway is in my Hollywood Squares. You're here, aren't you, Aaron?
How are you?
Yay, yeah. There he is. Yeah. Okay, good. Because I have some questions for Aaron. So I would have panicked if you weren't on. Okay. So commercial eviction moratorium. I'm going to actually use a little bit of a different format. I'm going to talk about the commercial eviction moratorium briefly. And then actually, I want to throw out a few questions that are things that have come up for people, in the process of navigating the commercial eviction moratorium. So very quickly, the moratorium basically says that if for some COVID-focused reason, a tenant cannot pay rent, and they don't pay rent in April, May, or June, a landlord may not, for any reason of non-payment related to COVID, terminate a tenant's lease, take any action, judicial or otherwise, relating to, kind of complicated eviction law. Serve notice, deliver or act on any notice, order of writ of termination or the equivalent of to get rid of a tenant in their space, or interfere with the tenant's right to possession of a leased premises. And so by not paying rent, they mean rent, triple net cams, any of those things. And in order to use this moratorium as a basis for saying, I'm not going to pay rent within 30 days of saying you're not paying rent, you need to let your landlord know with documentation that the non-payment was caused by COVID, either directly or indirectly. And there's a mix of different ways that people are doing that. But proof of loss of income due to any governmental restriction is the most common thing that people are using. So doing something with profit and loss statements or year-over-year tax statements are common ways of doing that. There are a couple of things that I want to stress about this. There's a lot of gray area in this notification. And so basically, while it's saying that you don't have to pay rent during that 90-day period, it does not in any way say that rent is not due. And there's nothing in this moratorium that clearly says at the end of this, let's say you don't pay rent for 3 months, and then you get a loan from someone you know for 3 months worth of rent that you pay on July 1st, as soon as the moratorium is over. It's very unclear. There's nothing in the law that states if, and Aaron, I would love for you to weigh in on this, if I pay all my rent on July 1st, can a landlord still declare you in default and try and move forward with evicting you from the space? So technically, those are not called out or accounted for right now as the eviction moratorium stands. Now, it's not going to be fun for a landlord. They're going to be in a long line of court actions and, to try and say why they're kicking you out, even though you're paying rent back. But the reality is there's nothing that says as soon as that's over that you might not be declared in default and that a landlord might not move forward with action. And so one of the first questions that I had for Aaron as the esteemed lawyer on the panel is, just kind of what, and I will just reissue a joke I heard from a lawyer when I asked him that question before. He said, well, Michelle, he said, a lot of lawyers are going to get paid a lot of money to figure out the answer to that question. What happens at the end of the commercial eviction moratorium if someone pays rent and a landlord still wants to declare them in default for not having paid rent during that period. So Aaron, I would just be curious to know, knowing that none of this is set and there's no case law and it's unprecedented, kind of what you're hearing or what you think about that.
Yeah, my thoughts is by the letter of the law, sure. If theoretically and academically, we just read it, but in all the conversations that I'm having, most landlords just want to get paid rent. Even if the moratorium is lifted in June and someone is still late and pays by July, will a landlord pursue not only the time it will take for an eviction proceeding, the cost it will take for eviction proceeding, and then from there, how much time it will actually take to actually get heard in court. As you can imagine, courts obviously, so they're probably bogged down with tons of cases that's not even real estate related. So by the time courts do fully opened up, it will be so far down the road that if the landlord finally got his money in July, for them to still pursue it and the cost that it would take to pursue it, just doesn't seem the best use of time. So theoretically, yes, it could happen. My hunch is practically speaking, it probably won't if they do get paid at some point. And just to follow up, even if landlords want to pursue that, I mean, look, you have the cost, you have the time, and then you also have the cost of fixing up the space, getting the space ready for a new tenant, which is more capital you have to put out. And then who are you going to lease to? What tenant is out there that you're going to lease to all of a sudden that, to fill in your space? So that's just a lot of unknowns for a landlord to take, especially if they eventually do get paid. So you would think most of the landlord clients that I have are for the most part reasonable. Well, hopefully they're reasonable. I've heard some stories of sharp elbows and some unreasonable takes, but the clients that I've had so far as landlord clients have been reasonable and it's been open to working things out, and they've been working things out with their lenders, with their insurance and things of that nature. But practically speaking, theoretically, to answer your question, yes, a landlord could, if you're in default day one after the moratorium, they could. My hunch is, and I hope I'm right, is that, look, if you eventually pay even in July, 30 days later, that landlords will just be happy to get paid and not pursue some of the remedies that they will otherwise have that, that just seems unreasonable. And even though, and it's implied in your lease that at least all parties will be reasonable. And for you to pursue this and take advantage of folks that are dealing with a national pandemic, just seems out of place.
And so there are a couple of things that are coming up around the commercial eviction moratorium, specifically around what kind of documentation needs to be provided, because it's very vague. And a lot of landlords are really trying to push, this gives me the right to ask for whatever documentation I want. And a lot of tenants are feeling uncomfortable either saying no or saying, well, actually, I'm going to provide you with this documentation. So I just want to be clear that the moratorium does not say that it's up to the landlord to decide what documentation is needed.
Yeah.
But again, I think that what Aaron was talking about, you want to think about everything you do around the commercial eviction moratorium within the umbrella of what is reasonable.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that that everything that you do is supported, so that if it does come down to some sort of an arbitration or a judge reading things, that all of this seems like a reasonable response to what you're doing. So trying to provide adequate documentation, but that doesn't mean that you have to provide everything that a landlord may demand in this, because that's one of the things that we're seeing. And I wanted to add on, the other question that's coming up quite a bit is around personal guarantees and how they sort of connect to the commercial eviction moratorium, because the eviction moratorium really uses language that is around, not moving forward with processes or procedures that are related to eviction. But personal guarantees on a lease, and most of them are written a little bit differently, so it depends on how they're written, but they typically allow for a landlord to bypass the corporate entity and go straight to the individual for any sort of monetary default on the lease. So one of the questions I've also been hearing around the commercial eviction moratorium are related to personal guarantees and what people need to worry about, in the sense of, can somebody go, and I guess I would be curious about your interpretation, Aaron. Most of the people I've been hearing about feel that going after a personal guarantee, although is not technically about eviction, most, I think, people are feeling uncomfortable doing that during the moratorium. What's your feeling kind of on personal guarantees and the spirit of the eviction moratorium Do you think that means that landlords really shouldn't be doing that during the moratorium, but it's kind of fair game after?
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, it's a little bit of uncharted territory. I haven't seen, just dealing with some of my larger landlords, that they are pursuing guarantors. Can they? Sure. So just put it out there. Can they? Just, haven't seen anything in the moratorium that prevents a landlord from pursuing a guarantor in connection with a tenant default. The moratorium deals with the eviction, but the unpaid bill and the default
Makes
can
sense.
still be pursued.
I love it.
So,
That's good, girl.
oh, so I still haven't I haven't seen any moratorium on that. So that's, just put it out there. Yes, that is a risk that's out there. Practically speaking, is what we're advising our clients is to, one, and this is more to a point that you made earlier as far as what information to provide. Be candid, be
Can't
open,
hear it
because
now.
what you're
I
trying to
don't know
do
how that
is
happened.
so, what you're trying to do is, come to an agreement with your landlord that avoids us going to court when the moratorium is over, so that your your guarantee will not be pursued. So that's what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that courts are, again, like we mentioned earlier, are so bogged down that yes, you have all the rights and remedies and all the bullets in the chambers, but you can't really fire them off because what court is hearing them. So we're hoping that the hope is that landlords and tenants can somehow come to an agreement. Now it's all uncharted. There's no bright lines here. So that's the hard part, which is unsettling. And I totally empathize where our tenants are coming from. But the hope is that, look, landlords and tenants can somehow figure this out, or at least come to an agreement of what to do afterwards, rather than going to a court proceeding. And the risk, and on the landlord side, look, if you're going to sue a guarantor and you're not willing to be reasonable, you just have to stand in line. And that may be a very long time. And is that worth the landlord's time, their money, just kind of the opportunity cost of pursuing this and pursuing a guarantor, which may not have enough to begin with, to pursue that route, as opposed to, okay, let's see how we can figure this out. Because this risk that we're dealing with the national pandemic was nothing that was anticipated. It's not a business risk. It's something that happened to everyone that we really didn't plan for. So are you really going to go down and waste time, money, cost, and things of that nature for your side and my side to pursue a guarantor, which you may not even get the funds to begin with? You may get even a judgment a year from now, but you may not even get paid for that. So is it really worth that? So it's really that hope that, look, yes, you have the right. Sure, academically, yes. Letter of the law, yes, you do. But practically speaking, is it really worth your time, given what we're dealing with, and given the time and cost to really pursue that?
So that kind of takes me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about in my time for commercial eviction moratorium, which is, what do you use this time for? Because right now, as it is written, and there are a lot of people working on add-ons for this, but as it is written today,
Yeah.
if you're going to use this time to not pay rent, what we're kind of really hearing is you need to try to come to some agreement that's reasonable for what to do when things open back up. You need to use this pause as an ability to work with your landlord for something on an ongoing basis. And my preferences are: ask for abatement with no add-on, ask for abatement of rent and add it on to the end of the lease, or ask for deferral of rent, but amortizing that deferral for as long a period as possible over the life of the lease, if possible. So those are kind of the three approaches that you want to try to take with your landlords, recognizing that we all know when you open back up, nobody's going to be at 2019 sales levels, and you are likely going to do more rounds of negotiating on what your ongoing lease looks like. So stop worrying about how am I going to legislate the next 18 months to 2 years, because probably for property owners, they're going to figure this out kind of slowly, that we're all in this together. So really, you're just looking at kind of making them happy right now, having some sort of agreement in place, either informally or formally in writing, but something in writing that says you don't have to pay it all back July 1st. And then we're just going to have to kind of see what happens when we open, because right now we don't have any protection for when we open, although, that's something that people are working on. My last quick question related to this in the commercial eviction moratorium is, can a landlord July 1st, if they're going to go down one of these kind of napalm DEFCON 1, can they just lock you out? Can they say, I'm going after eviction, or I'm going after your personal guarantee? Can they just lock you out and then you're out of luck for that year while it went through the courts? Like, that's kind of the question.
You cannot. You cannot exercise self-help for eviction. You may have all the rights. They didn't pay. They're a holdover. They're not complying. You got to go to court for that. You got to get a
Okay.
court. You cannot lock the doors on someone. So that's hopefully brings some type of comfort on folks. But to your question, to your point that you made earlier, as far as rent concessions, I'm seeing the same thing as far as, variety of options, whether to the extent it makes sense. You have abatement, like you mentioned before, you're deferring rent, you're adding additional months on the back end as far as, extending the lease covered, amortizing over maybe a period, a 1 year period. To the extent it makes sense for your business, maybe a percentage rent deal for a period of time. Instead of paying the fixed base rent when you don't know what demand is going to look like, let's just convert it to a percentage rent, and I'll pay your percentage of that over some type of base, things of that nature. And then another thing I'm advising to our clients is that, look, be open, be candid, honest of the disease you're facing, and do not feel guilty of not coming to an agreement about rent concessions. I'm for an abatement, but I don't want to give you this commitment of, hey, I'll pay rent, months down the road, when I have no clue of, one, what demand was going to look like, what sales going to look like, and I don't even know what how much cost in capital it would take to restart. So I can't commit myself to anything, and I know it's a tricky feeling, because you feel like the landlord is giving you something and working with you, but you're not meeting them halfway, and so there's a guilt feeling of not agreeing to something since they're working with you. But at the end of the day, for something like this, where we have this unprecedented times, try not to overcommit yourself for something that you literally have no idea of how this is going to look on the other side. So it's more of those, look, we can agree to work something out down the road. I'm not saying the bill should be forgiven. I'm not saying I don't owe you. I realize that I'm empathizing with you as you're empathizing with me. But at this point in time, I have no clue of what it looks like on the other side. So I'm unable to commit to paying this rent amortized down the road. I agree I owe you and we'll work it out, but I can't commit to that right now. And that's a perfect stance to take. It's nothing, just because of kind of the times that we're in. Feel free to reach out to other tenants, maybe in the building, to the extent you're a multi-tenanted building, and maybe there's a collective effort that you can take with other tenants that are kind of facing the same difficulty. There's powers in numbers. But all that to say, there's numerous options that I'm seeing how this is being dealt with. First off, it just always start with the communication. Definitely, if you haven't reached out to your landlord, do so today. It's a tough conversation to have, but it's necessary. It's inevitable. And just get that process started. And what you'll find is landlords are asking for information, and that's a judgment call as far as what information to give. Probably financial statements. I wouldn't worry about having to proof or having to provide actual proof of how I've been impacted. Everyone has been. So the landlord may provide what you can, because hopefully they are providing that to their lender in order to have a restructure their loan. So there's have to be some disclosure and honesty and some back and forth with that. I had one tenant where they were requesting information, but the landlord also asked for a guarantee. And I said, whoa, okay, look, we'll give information. I'm fine having that open transparency, but I'm not signing a guarantee of all times right now. So be careful what you're signing as far as giving information. Obviously, if there's anything confidential, be careful for that. But as far as disclosing, some of your records, I think that's worthwhile to do so. Especially, what's the harm really in the grand scheme of things. But for certain things, if they're looking for proof or more documentation, it's fine to say, look, this is what I have. This is what I have. It's obvious. I'm not, as far as the damage. And it's just unrealistic to give you every nickel and dime of how I've been impacted. So there's some comfort of saying, like, I provide what I can, but I'm not going to provide you some over-exhaustive list that's unreasonable for me to provide.
And I think that I'm totally cheating because I'm using my time and then I'm asking Aaron questions that are coming up in tenant conversations. So I don't want to serve to like doubly filibuster. And I know that Sarah Daly was up next, which sort of really blends into from what Aaron was saying about communications and the things you can talk about and strategies. And I know that's kind of the stuff that Sarah was going to talk about next. So
no, I think this is great. I'm trying to read some of the questions, and Calvin, let me know if I'm missing questions. But I think this is kind of a perfect lead in as far as things that I was going to try to respond to. But yeah, so first off, if we've already mentioned it, several times today, the first thing to do, if you haven't already, is obviously have that conversation. We've prepared some type of form notice for some of our tenant clients where we kind of have kind of an exhaustive list of things that just kind of a more sympathetic email. And I'm going to share that to folks if folks want to reach out to me for notices that we are sending. And the conversation really goes, look, I'm unable to pay, and be hesitant to commit if you're unable to. And then it's just a conversation of what happens now. And trying to give some comfort to tenants. The conversation I'm having is trying to give comfort to tenants that, you know what, it's not okay, it's unsettling times, but it's okay not to have a solution and a resolution right now, given that there are some protections there. You can't be evicted, they can't lock you out. We do know we need to deal with this at some point through a conversation, because after the moratorium, that bill does become due. So we do need to try to see how we can work this out. Right now was what, April 23rd. Have some time, not a lot, have some time to work this out. But landlords, the pressure can't always go downstream to tenants. And that's what I'm advising my landlords. The tenants are customer facing and there's no customers. So landlords have to also exhaust their resources, and they have those resources, whether it's insurance, they have rental loss income insurance, to the extent they pick that up, they restructure their loan. There's reserves in place that they have to cover for things like this. One client I ended up telling was that, look, the leasing space for the most part is not the tenant's core business. It's a part of their business. It's not the core business of a tenant. Thus, anything that's happening regarding real estate, that risk may have not have been anticipated because it's not part of your core business. However, for landlords, that's their core business to lease space. So some of the risks that they're facing now, where it might not have been anticipated to the extent it is, as far as a tenant not being able to pay. So they are in a better position to be covered in the event of this type of circumstances than the tenants are. So as far as where the risk and allocation goes, there has to be some pressure on the landlord to exhaust their resources versus them looking to the tenants to figure this thing out. So trying to provide some relief and comfort as far as how do we navigate it. A lot of this is uncharted territory. But again, it starts with communication, starts with being candid, providing documentation to the extent you have it, to the extent it's reasonable to provide it, and not feeling guilty of not agreeing to something right away, especially when you have no insight as far as how things will look on the other end. Calvin, were there any specific questions? I'm trying to look.
Actually, I'm hoping we can clarify a little bit here what exactly providing documentation of loss of revenue looks like. This is the first time a lot of businesses have had to do that.
Yeah.
So exactly what does that look like when you give it to your landlord? And then, is there specific guidelines around that you need to show that within 30 days after non-payment of rent, or just as soon as you possibly can before you're not going to pay?
Yeah, so, as soon as you possibly can. I think transparency is key here. As soon as you can, I would just, for the tenant's perspective, even though you may be in a position you can't commit to anything, transparency is key, because the folks that are not transparent, the folks that are not communicating, those are the folks that's going to be, responded to once this is over with the most sharp elbows. Those are the folks that the landlord is probably going to pursue more heavily than folks that are, at least try to be transparent and disclose some things. Plus, you want a record. So if a court is looking at this a year from now, you want a record for yourself that you were reasonable, you attempted, you tried. This is my documentation that I was providing, and the landlord, whether they're reasonable or not, you at least are covered for yourself that you at least attempted, which hopefully will look better in your favor. As far as documentation, again, that's uncharted territory. To the extent you have records, and I wouldn't get, to be honest, I wouldn't get so caught up as providing perfect documentation. No, this is uncharted territory, which no one planned for, so no one can anticipate what's the right documentation. To the extent you have it, to the extent you have records or receipts or things of that nature that you can show, maybe a loss of sales or things of that nature, that can be fine. Or if you've laid off folks, unfortunately, that should be enough. But my staff and or foot traffic has dropped dramatically. I think some of the obvious, it's fairly obvious the impact. So that I wouldn't get caught up by having to document every nickel and dime or every number to support your theory that you've been impacted. Let's see. To the extent, I think the question, if you're being inflexible, still be transparent, still be candid, have that record. And I've only had this situation one time so far of a landlord just, pursuing them, threatening to lock the doors. Have your record in place for you that you've at least been candid, at least been reasonable. And look, landlord, again, if they really want to push it through and be, difficult, the landlord can, not to use this analogy, they have all the bullets in place. They cannot fire that off. So they really want to be inflexible here. What you're going to wait a year, take on costs of pursuing someone that you may not get a resolution to for a year from now, and then the upfront cost of fixing and turning a space over to find an environment where you have no tenant, to me doesn't make any logical sense for a tenant to take that approach. But again, we can't control what landlords and how they respond. But what I would say is, at least for you, have your record, show that you were reasonable, and if they really want to go down that path, then God bless them, go stand in line, and good luck a year and a half from now and see what happens. I have not found, so far, I have not found that approach by a lot of landlords. Many landlords are looking to work something out, or at least, provide some type of relief for the most part. And it's been an open kind of interaction between landlords and tenants at this time. Happy to whoever is dealing with a difficult landlord, happy to, kind of put our heads together as far as strategically how to put something together, a written notice, so we have a record in a file. So in the event we do need to escalate this, we have a record for that. So happy to discuss strategics if you're in that situation.
And I will be following up with all attendees tomorrow. So with some of these samples we've talked about and some of the contact info you guys might want, you can expect to see that in an email to you tomorrow. Real quick before we move on to Sarah, I just want to clarify that if you're just getting no response from your landlord whatsoever and they haven't talked to you at all and just complete non-communication, you should still be taking those same steps to document and just prepare for a worst case scenario, correct?
Absolutely. Just so you have your file and you have your basis. And I just, again, I'm not guaranteeing, I'm not even giving the legal opinion. I can't see any court, punishing tenants extremely hard for landlord and bad actors who are not reasonable for a national pandemic. We'll see. Well, no guarantees. We understand there's rights and remedies that the landlord may have. I just can't see someone looking favorably on someone that, if you have a record of being reasonable for something that everyone is facing, and for landlords not to be reasonable in return, I can't see for a positive outcome from the landlord side. So, but yes, keep your record, show everything that try not to react and respond to some of if you're dealing with a bad actor.
All right, I want to move on to Sarah here. And Sarah, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more in detail about just this landlord psychology right now, and what they're thinking about as we look towards, a prolonged shutdown.
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing I want to say about the landlord psychology is that it's pretty ridiculous that we have to all be therapists for your landlords, right? Like, the business owners are the ones, aside from their workers, who are taking this hit the hardest. And so my biggest advice is let yourself feel terrible about that. It's really unfair. And one of the things, I'm a real estate broker, in case you didn't catch that. And so I negotiate for a living. And one of the things that I've had to learn kind of the hard way is that what's fair sometimes matters less in your strategy and your in your effort to meet your own best interests. So in talking about the landlord psychology, I'm doing that for you, for your own interests, so that if you understand where they're coming from and you understand what works with them in terms of a communication strategy, then you might get a better deal at the end of all of this, and you might have a better relationship with your landlord, which it's sad that that's sort of your job to make that happen, but it will end up better for you and you'll have more options. So acknowledging the vast injustice of this, I'm going to rattle through this really quickly because I'd like to get to John and Renee as quickly as possible, but I will put my contact information in the chat, and then Calvin's going to be following up with more information. So anyone is welcome to email or call me with questions about your specific situation. I'm not charging for that service right now, and I really want to absolutely extend that invitation to reach out if you need support. So one thing to remember is that the landlords, because they're higher up on the privilege chain, what you already know and what has been your reality for the last 6 weeks, they are just learning. So to Michelle's point, they need time to get their heads around this. And again, not fair, but if you treat them a little bit like, say, someone who just isn't as educated with you about your area of expertise, instead of thinking that it's personal or that they are evil, or they're just getting their heads around this whole event. So I think it's just important to remember they're also afraid, and they know that they can't afford to lose tenants. They know that better than you do, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing that fear with you. And so just know, just as you are struggling with making good decisions while fearful, they're in that same boat. And so just trying to find some compassion and empathy for the experience that they're having, which to them, they feel like they're in the same boat that you are. And so hopefully we'll get an opportunity to educate them a little bit about how that's not quite true. And hopefully time will help us do that. So, the other thing I like to tell people, and it's very hard to do, easy to advise, is to just get yourself in a place where you put yourself enough in their shoes to kind of borrow some of the confidence that you perceive them having, some of the power, some of the tools, some of the relationships. So empathy has a couple of different functions. One is to have compassion, and the other is to borrow a perspective that you need. So however you can, letting go of your fear is, for now, just for a little time, is going to help you in being creative and being constructive and being compassionate. The other thing that I'm seeing from landlords is that they're putting their tenants in categories. Their tenants are either really communicative and like easy to negotiate with and paying their CAMs or their rent, or, throwing a bone to the landlords. And so that's on the positive end of their spectrum. And on the negative end of their spectrum are the tenants who aren't contacting them or who are invoking legislation to protect them. And so that is, again, a reasonable thing to do. It's a reasonable thing to say, there's a commercial moratorium. You can't go after me yet. But it's not an effective way to communicate with a landlord who is feeling a lot more defensive than you may perceive. And so you should own the power that you have. You should gather the power that you have with other business owners, and you should understand it and embrace it, but you shouldn't exert it overtly to the landlord, because that will put them on defense. So use it, be strategic about it, don't rub it in. It's not going to work to do that. And so the other thing to just make sure to remember is that the landlords, their job is to look long-term, and our jobs as business owners, and I include myself in this category, is to look long-term also. But a lot of times as small business owners, we are more tactical than strategic because we don't have time to be strategic. But landlords are thinking about a year from now, 2 years from now. And so what they want to know is, how are you going to dig out of this? Not just financially, but what are you doing with your business model? How are you handling the possibility that you'll have to accommodate social distancing in your business model? How are you beefing up e-commerce for yourself? Like, is that viable? What are you doing in the community to keep yourself out there and to keep, your staff and your brand engaged? And so they want to know they want you to be creative, which is really, really hard right now. But that's what they want from you. And again, they are just learning, they're just beginning to understand the scope and depth of the losses that they will have to take on. So when they say to you, you have to make me whole eventually, and I have to cover my operating expenses, and I have to get my lender's permission to abate rent, and all these things, just nod sympathetically, but know in your heart that at some point they're going to have to get the memo that we all have to pay.
Thanks for addressing that, Sarah. I do want to pivot right now to Renee and John Gorham, co-owners of Toro Bravo, Inc. And John, I'm hoping you can kick things off. You work with a couple different types of landlords, and from what I understand, you've fostered quite a good relationship with all of them, or most of them, I should say. How do you go about fostering that? And then what are the differences in communication styles that you use with each of your property owners?
Well, I have 10 different landlords. So like some of the comments that were said, I'm not, some of us aren't in the business of real estate deals. After 10, I've kind of gotten into that business a little bit. So I understand it a little bit. And I have good actors and bad actors and the whole group. I have some bullies and I have some really compassionate, I would say, just straight partners in what I'm doing in life. And the first bit of advice I have for everybody, right away is to communicate and over communicate. So, and I do that anyways, if I'm in good or bad, I'm talking to my landlords, especially the ones I like and fostered, and the ones that are the bad actors, I tend to just go right to the lease. And, if there's an issue, I cite the lease and say, this is what needs to get cleared up. And, so when this happened, what I decided to do, which everyone's not going to have the luxury of, is I addressed the whole, so that the bad actors would almost have to come out and be assholes in front of the good guys, which actually made everyone play very fair. So I would, every time I had to address them, I'd be like, I'm happy, we're scared right now. This is what we're planning to do. This is what we can see happening in the future. And then I asked them all, what do you need to be whole yourself? Like, what can I do to help? And then I started, when I came up with my plans of what to do with myself and my business over the next couple months, I shared that with them. I would get on that group email and be like, well, we're going to open up each restaurant a week from each other for to-go food. I don't think it's going to be high. I think I'm going to pay my labor and my food costs, but I got the restaurants active. I got the property, secured, so there are people there. It's going to cut down on vandalism. And then I kept going from there. And then if I applied for assistance or loans, I would be like, hey, I applied today. I'll let you know what happens if something comes out of that. But I'm on it. I'm on every step of help I can possibly get. And then I started sharing information on that stuff for their tenants. I would actually go, hey, I just did a lot of research on PPP. I'm going to email you my research and let you know that this is what I found out, and maybe you can use this bit of information to help your other tenants. So try to get into a partnership with them of that, hey, we're in this together. Let's work through this together. And I can't pull money I don't have out of my butt, but I can show you that I'm working hard to resolve this issue.
Great. And then looking to Renee, I'm wondering how you're, as an operator, handling the stress of juggling rents, working with your staff, and also just trying to operate your businesses during this shutdown. What does that look like to you? How are you handling it? And what have you launched sort of in response to that?
Yeah, well, thanks. I think we all can agree that this is a terrifying reality, and as time goes on, and I can't believe we're a month into this shutdown, and I don't foresee a quick recovery anytime soon. So every day is different. It was really, really hard to make the decision to close all of our operations for at least in-house dining. We laid off about 275 people, which was just one of the hardest things I have ever been a part of. And my heart goes to our staff first and foremost. There's so much grief that comes with the immediate and instant it feels like failure, even though it's not something that we have control over. And so trying to kind of separate out those feelings of grief and fear and turn those into motivation and innovation. I think we're all trying to figure out, as we've been closed down, how to pivot our businesses and, reframe our operations and just make the most out of this, current reality that we're in right now. And so, our goal is to keep our brand present, keep ourselves, out there and be a part of our community, and rehire as many of our staff members back as we can in a safe manner. So, we were in a position to close all 9 locations, and then slowly, one by one, we started opening up, just for takeout. Under the mandates, we can't, of course, do anything more than that. And we also had just signed a lease and built out this huge event space in the Pearl. And so not only were we, looking at the debt, building that out, but we have no idea how long it's going to take until we can throw, large events, let alone, even seat 10 or 20 people within our dining rooms. And so essentially we turned Plaza del Toro into a commissary kitchen, and we started a program called Feed It Forward. We were able to keep on a few of our staff members, and so we moved all of our food inventory over to this space. We started giving away free food bags out to the community, to our employees, to anybody in need. And then the Feed It Forward program is essentially a meal train sponsorship, where we've always been big community advocates, and we've always tried to really connect with our community. We've had long relationships with a lot of local nonprofits, and I saw them suffering just as much as everybody. And they're working on shoestring budgets. They've lost their volunteers. They've lost the ability to serve the people that they do within their organizations. And so I realized that we could provide them with hot meals and meals to serve their people by asking the community for donations. And so people can essentially contribute whatever they can. And then that's allowed us to keep some of our staff employed, and also to keep, buying food from the local farmers and purveyors. So in a very small way, it's keeping us alive, and it's covering just enough to pay our labor and to pay our food costs. And then we're also providing like sliding scale meals at all of our restaurants that are open. And so anybody facing food insecurity right now can call any of our locations and say, hey, I have $5, I have $10, I have $0, and I'm looking to feed my family of 4 or my family of 6, and we will feed you. And so although this is not going to save our business, this is going to keep us present, and it's also put us in a really good position to negotiate with our landlords, because we're really doing something for the greater good, and we're also trying to reinvigorate a small portion of the economy. They see that we're trying to do something for the whole, and they've been much more compassionate and lenient toward us. I totally understand that we don't all have the bandwidth to reorganize our operations and shift into doing something like this. For me, it just was a natural kind of step and a natural progression, because we really have fostered these relationships with these nonprofits. And so, it feels weird to talk about this a little bit in a conversation like this, because, of course, this is about evictions and moratoriums. But it just feels like the right thing to do as a human. And I want to just share with everybody, like, please share this program with anybody who or if you're in need, like, call our restaurants, come in and get a free bag of food on Fridays at Plaza, and think about how you can pivot with kindness and empathy for the whole, and it will come back to you. A lot of our landlords saw that we were doing programs like this, and they gave us an even bigger break, or they were more likely to negotiate. Some of our like our security company and, some of the other purveyors that we have started donating things. And it just feels really good to respond with compassion. It might not help the end result, but right now I think whatever we can do to act with empathy is going to come back to us in the bigger picture.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of positive comments in the chat about the Feed It Forward program. What I think is great too is just that it lifts the whole community up, but then relevant to our conversation here is that you're demonstrating to your landlord not only am I trying to help my community here, but I'm trying to do it in a really savvy way. Which if we're learning anything today, it's that over communicate, do consistent communication and just show them that you're really, really trying. Show them that you're trying your best. And I think through programs like Feed It Forward, that's a really unique dimension that you're adding to that conversation. I do want to pivot right now to a couple of common questions we're receiving. And I think I've heard, Michelle, you speak to this before, but all of our panelists might have an opinion on this. What do you guys think are the upsides and downsides to revenue sharing leases? Understanding that, income is so flexible right now, it's up and down. We just don't know with any certainty what your income's going to look like. What should you be thinking about if you're considering going forward with a revenue sharing lease?
So two things. The first that I wanted to say is in relation to kind of the chat thread and what everyone said before this. This is just a slight deviation before I answer the question. I actually think that from a Venture Portland or Prosper Portland perspective, one of the things that might be really great, because John touched on this and we've all talked about it in one form or another in various conversations, the rest of the panelists, I think information between landlords, which, there is no body in which like Venture Portland where landlords just get together and chat about what they're doing, right? So they're all working in a vacuum, and the power of hearing what good actors are doing actually changes some of the actions of the bad actors in this equation. So I think one of the most valuable things that we could do right now from a Prosper Portland, Venture Portland perspective is to catalog good behavior by a range of different landlords, new construction, longtime large property owners, small mom and pops, get a mix of different landlords doing different things, and really highlight the people who are doing full rent abatement, who are doing rent deferral, but just adding it on to the end of the lease, and talk about those specific tools that are really helpful for landlords and cover kind of a wide geographic area, because landlords will look at what other people are doing in their immediate geographic area. They'll look at those options that are on there and say like, okay, I get it. And it will give tenants something to forward to their landlords about what other people are doing. So I think that's something that would be really valuable for Venture Portland, Prosper Portland to put together and to put out there, just for landlords, for information sharing, and for tenants to have some information. So that's kind of an aside. So, and now I have sort of spaced on your question was about, refresh my memory very quickly.
I'm wondering what the upsides and downsides
percentage
are
rent
to
lease.
revenue sharing leases.
So I basically, all the landlords that I'm talking to and working with, or any of the policy things that I'm doing around the country where we're getting together groups of landlords. And it's kind of like I said in the chat. So we often get into a situation where people think, or they forget, that rent per square foot is tied to sales per square foot, period, in every market. And so when I have a market where rents are really low, it's not because landlords are great, it's because sales are really low. So the reality is the rent everyone was paying in 2019 is tied to 2019 sales levels. And honestly, in Portland, we were already getting to a point where rent per square foot was really pressing up. And I think Tor Bravo will probably concur with that. When you go to lease new space, like the margins were razor thin, right? There's not a lot of fat. Like we're really right on the line with what we were charging in rent per square foot with what sales per square foot could support. I don't know a single business outside of alcohol and weed that is seeing, and maybe grocery, that is seeing higher sales per square foot than they were in 2019. And I think most businesses are going to be somewhere between, 5% of 2019 if they're just having to, sell something out of a cart in front of their store, to maybe 75% of 2019. But we could really see this really wide range. We also, over the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, could see rolling waves of openness. We might be open for the summer. We might close down again in the winter. We might open up again in the spring. So we really have no idea to predict. Somebody's sales could be 75% of 2019 one month and then 5% of 2019 the next month. So we need a system that is going to allow us to actually kind of roll with that and be flexible. And so in talking to a retired banker, debt restructurer, investment maker, I was asking him from a lending or landlord point of view, how often would you check in and sort of repurpose that? And he said sort of in 6 months increments. So I think you can kind of sit down with your landlord and say, when the commercial eviction moratorium is up, is you want to be really clear, like, here are all the things we're doing, here's where we're projecting sales, here's how we've changed our revenue streams and done different things to try and be profitable. Here's kind of where we're projecting sales. We'd like to propose a percentage rent lease based on that. And let's see how it goes for the next 6 months. And then we'll kind of look at that, because within 6 months, you're likely to see if there's going to be a spike or a rolling or up and down. We're going to see enough, kind of noise to understand what's sort of real data and what's just the noise and the up and down. So that's kind of what I would propose going forward for people, is calculate what percent of sales in 2019 your rent was, and then just use that same percentage moving forward for your leases for the next 6 months starting July 1st. That's sort of a baseline proposal that I would put forward to landlords, and let them propose something different if they don't like that in return. But that's where I would start.
Great. Another thing I'd like for us to discuss, and Sarah, I've spoken with you about this a little bit, but what do we think sort of a paradigm shift in the post-shutdown reality looks like? How can landlords and tenants try to work, more together in the future, especially as we realize over the course of this panel discussion that there's a big ladder here that doesn't just start with the person renting the space. It goes up to the landlord, to the property owner, to the lender. How can some of these parties work together to try and, improve our post-shutdown reality?
Well, I think there's a couple choices, right? There's always a choice. You can be constructive or you can be adversarial. And I think fear breeds, the latter. But I'd be interested to hear what John and Renee have to say about this. I think my deepest hope is that landlords and tenants will come together and realize that they have an incredible amount of power to tell the lending community and the government and even the consumers to some degree, look, guys, if you want a community to hang out in, even if you're 6 feet apart from each other, if you want stuff to do outside your house, this is what it's going to take. This is what we need. And I think there's just going to have to be a lot of education and waking up between landlords and tenants to acknowledge kind of the differences in their situations before they can really team up, and be one unified force.
Yeah, I think one of the scariest things on that right now that we have as the tenants being the bottom of the pool is we've all just got shut down and we had all our income taken away from us. And our employees, they have if you laid off, they have a backup. They're gonna go be okay and get funded. And our landlords, in the beginning, they were very much like, well, we're gonna get ours eventually. And I think one of the things that we need some leadership in the community, especially and probably our nation, is that everybody's going to have to sacrifice. There's going to be losses on everybody, and how do we make that? How do we make that fair? How do we make it? There's always going to be bad actors, so someone's going to try to gain at a time where everyone's losing, and that's gonna be scary. But right now we need leadership to go. What sacrifices are you all willing, from the bottom up, willing to make to get your community back to where you loved? Because if it's just on us, it's going to collapse. That's a fact. And I think the landlords have to realize that without playing ball, that it's going to be a collapse. they were talking about it earlier. Aaron was talking about, if they take us to court and lock us out and shut the space, who's going to rent it when it's over? So we all have to play ball together, and it's going to, I think the biggest thing that we can all do is don't get angry ever, even when you have a bad actor. Just stay compassionate. If the bad actor has gotten to a point where it's impossible to deal with, stop. Do not verbally talk to them. Go to email only, so you have a record of communications. So you put out nice words, put out ways to try to navigate it. And then if you ever do go to court, there's no he said, she said. It's straight up, here's the documentation of what happened. And really try to build that relationship with your landlord right now of being like, what You may have figured out rents for the next 3 months, but this is going. I fully believe this isn't our only shutdown before this is over, and I think that our hardest days are going to be reopening, and then the shutdowns that happen after that, and that's when the government's going to have exhausted a lot of their resources by then, and then we're going to kind of be on our own boats, and they're going to hope that we've all learned to talk to each other by then.
We got about less than 5 minutes here, but I want to follow up on what you just said, John, which is that, what are you thinking about as a business owner, knowing that it's looking increasingly like we might be going into another shutdown come the fall? What's running through your head? What is, has there been anything that you're looking towards pivoting your business towards? Just what are you thinking about as we look towards that?
Well, I think everybody on here is an entrepreneur. And so everybody's got to put their entrepreneur hats on right now, right? We all got to start thinking of ways to, I always call it hustle. You're going to have to figure out how to hustle yourselves. All our community still has to eat. They all have needs. They all want to, I see yoga on here. All these things everyone still wants to do. So we're all going to have to shift and find ways to deliver what we had in different ways. And right now, the scariest time for me was the day I laid all the employees. I was completely lost, and it took me. I was out of breath. I was in full panic mode. I was scared. I had 20 years of being a business owner. I never paid a bill late once until this happened, and I didn't know how to navigate those phone calls. And I did them, and I think now that this is that I have found a way right now. The future's not so scary if all of a sudden I get to reopen and I got to close again. Well, I've already figured out how to close. I figured that out. I got that. I might not be perfect at it, and I think I can improve on it and future closures, but I'm not in the dark as I was a month ago.
Thanks for that, John. We're about at 1 o'clock now, so I want to wrap it up. Again, there will be an email going out tomorrow with some details of this. We're going to post this panel discussion online for you to review, and the chat as well will be available to review. And then any of the resources mentioned today, we'll be sharing with you all tomorrow. So thanks again to our panelists, Sarah, Aaron, Michelle, John, and Renee. It's really, really great to see everyone come together here and try to just get through this all together. And hopefully we can continue this conversation as we all learn a little bit more about what this new reality looks like. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.